Hi, everyone. Harry here to talk about a compilation that's been published about the overall landscape of the federal courts and the Trump administration's efforts to systematically detain immigrants facing possible deportation. More than 100 federal judges have ruled more than 200 times in total that it's illegal. And obviously, some of those have to do with very particular fact situations and individual potential deportees. Others have to do with the whole policy. But it's a really breathtakingly panoramic pattern with very few dissenters. So we're talking about judges appointed by every president since Reagan, 12 of the 100 or so appointed by Trump, including one who just took the bench last month. So, big step back. Around July 4th, ICE officials reversed 30 years of practice and determined that ICE has to lock up everyone facing deportation. We've seen this with Abrego. We've seen it in many cases. It's really what happened at the beginning, in March in front of Judge Boasberg. They just come and take them away and lock them up. And now they were not even giving them due process. And now they're forced to by the Supreme Court's rulings, but still, people who have lived in the country for decades, people who have no criminal records, people who have nothing to do with the dystopia that and propaganda that Trump and the likes of Stephen Miller are banging the drum with daily about these criminal marauders running through cities, blue cities, almost always being invoked, and doing, everything from murders to eating pets. All of that's been complete bullshit. And they've been basically just dragooning anyone who doesn't have good papers. That's what's been happening, including people who I think the consensus of Americans would be, man, we don't want them deported. And in any event, we don't want them deported in this heavy-handed, brutal kind of police state way. And the new policy has all kinds of purported limitations on the sorts of fights that the prospective deportees can raise, and just many aspects and elements that, in a word, seem pretty damn un-American. All right, so the main thing is to just take stock of really how broad this is and think about it through the lens that it will presumably work its way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Remember, how this has happened. Still the vast majority of court rulings have come in situations of ostensible temporary determinations. Like, I will just temporarily freeze the linebackers, basically do a, temporary restraining order while we decide. And the administration has rushed up the courts to try to say, emergency, don't let him or her do this temporary restraining order. So that's been a lot of it. And now we're just really coming in 8 months later into determinations on the merits. But you put all those together and you are, finding really now kind of the courts having given strong views at the preliminary stage are now what you do after a preliminary injunction, even if it's reversed, is you now have a hearing, basically. This is just what Judge Immergut did last week, and I talked about it in a different YouTube. But you take evidence, you take testimony, etc., and you decide, will I enter a permanent injunction? From there, it can all be appealed. And that would really be normally what would happen, except the administration has at every kind of outpost, including preliminary relief, tried to claim emergency. But when you put it all together, it's a really the kind of consensus against the administration broadly in the courts that I'm not sure I've even seen before, but most to the point, I can't remember an instance like it where the U.S. Supreme Court eventually pulled out the rug from under a vast consensus of rulings and went the other way. And this court has been pretty inconsiderate of district courts. It hasn't given them the deference they're due, and it's kind of upbraided them and made them look bad more than once. And it's given them almost no guidance, to the point where you have district courts, and many of them saying anonymously and not even anonymously in sort of public gatherings, we don't know what they're saying. We want to obey. We sit to serve their guidance, but they don't have any guidance because so much of this is on the shadow docket, where they'll say something as curt as relief granted. So it puts us, and has continued to put us, in a terrible position. And so the sort of take-home point is the really very overwhelming consensus from all judges across political lines. There seem to be only two that have adopted, and not even in a full-bodied way, the administration's position that its new declared ICE policy actually passes legal and constitutional muster. So besides seeing this all compiled in a way that really brings home how patently, straightforwardly illegal it is, it also, to me, casts in a somewhat different light what we can anticipate will be an eventual definitive determination by the U.S. Supreme Court. And I'll just say that if you have the nation's highest court taking such an overwhelming national consensus, you could call it like 100-2, and just decapitating it, that I think would have all kinds of popular, legal, and political ramifications. They would be so clearly out of step with the law and the constitutional sense of conservative courts, moderate courts, liberal courts, and the like. So does that exert some kind of pressure on them? Maybe, or just as a fact, 100 lower courts can't be wrong. We'll see. They're a pretty arrogant bunch, I think, the justices of the U.S. Supreme Court, including especially the conservative uber majority. But it's got to, I think, give second, third, and fourth thoughts to encounter such a complete dominant range of consensus in the lower courts and just willy-nilly declare the law otherwise. So good to see just how stunning the whole consensus is, and it's a, I think, useful prism to look through for anticipating a Supreme Court opinion to be. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.